One of my greatest joys as a kid was finishing my homework and then doing my Kumon homework and then getting on my bike and just like riding around the neighborhood, going to the local park and playing basketball. You know, for a kid, a bike is like when you turn 16 and you get your driver's license and get into your mom's Camry and drive to Taco Bell, and you're like, freedom! It's like a 10-minute drive, but you just feel independent. You feel like this is your own space and time. And so a bike for me was like a car. It was freedom, it was joy. And so I get on my bike and ride around, and in 5th grade, my mom said, if you get straight A's, I'm gonna buy you a new bike. And so I got straight A's because I'm Asian, and so we went to the bike store, and my mom's driving, and she's like, so we're going to go to Costco and get you a Huffy mountain bike. And I straight up said, how dare you, woman? Like, no, like, I want to get a BMX. She's like, what in the world is a BMX? If you don't know what a BMX is, I straight up feel sorry for you, okay? I'm not going to get into what that is. But we went to Performance Bike Shop, and I'm telling her all about BMXs, and this is before the internet, so I'm looking at catalogs. You guys know what those are? It's not on your computer. It's ink, it's color. Yeah, so I'm looking at catalogs and I'm telling her everything about this BMX bike that I want. It's all chromed out. She's looking at it and she's like, that just looks really dangerous. There's like these pictures of guys taking off on ramps and doing tricks. She's like, it just looks really dangerous. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a dangerous kind of guy. I get my chromed out BMX, I go home and I'm showing off to my friends. I take off on these huge ramps, you know, like 6 inches, and I'm like, boom, 3 inches of air, you know what I'm saying? It's like I'm just enjoying my time, and it's just awesome. And I would polish it, I would wash it, I would keep it in the garage, you know, instead of keeping it outside so it doesn't rust. And I'm just loving and delighting and just enjoying this brand new bike. And then I get into junior high, and then I just get way too cool for BMXs, you know what I'm saying? And it turns out you can't ride bikes and wear beyond baggy pants at the same time. It just doesn't work. And so I'm too cool for school, and so I kind of stopped riding my BMX. And I know, sad story, just turn of events. And I just kind of leave it in the backyard. It's not in the garage anymore. Tires get flat. The chrome is not so shiny anymore. It gets rusty. The rubber on the seat just gets weathered out. And before I know it, it's just kind of getting in the way now. I don't even like it anymore. And before I know it, it just turns into this kind of pile of junk, right? Oh, I'm sorry, can we get those images up there, please? That's not it, but that's kind of it, right? Imagine me cruising around La Palma in that. What up? That's what's up. So next slide. This is like kind of what is left, right? Just kind of a pile of junk. You know, just useless tires and I don't know whether there's 2 seats, but there's 2 seats and 2 handlebars just kind of rusting away. I share that with you because I think sometimes it feels like spiritually we're this brand new, chromed out, you know, spiritual life with God. Like we're walking in a relationship with God, and we're sensing God, and we're enjoying God, and serving, and going to church, and all these things are great, and it's full of life, and it's full of energy, and we love it. And then just like that, a turn of events, it just gets really rusty really fast. And we feel like that kind of pile of junk. And it's hard to get ourselves out of that. Remember what I said about the Old Testament. I said that Old Testament stories are physical pictures of our spiritual condition. Moses, enjoying life, getting the best education, getting the best training, living under Pharaoh's house, getting the best food, living it up, commits murder, runs away, finds a family, finds a fake new kind of identity, and now he doesn't even know, now he's turning into this pile of junk. For him, he doesn't know it. For him, it's comfort, right? Which is dangerous because that's kind of how we mask, right, our spiritual apathy, comfort. And Moses is now kind of rotten away, kind of rusting spiritually. He's getting used to his family. He's getting used to the comfort. You see, we have to hear this. I know you've heard this, but we really have to hear this over and over again, church. God really, really loves you. I want you to hear that. No matter where you're coming from, no matter what kind of weeks or seasons you've had, you're here today. God really, really loves you. And we know that because when God is looking at Moses and he's feeling like a pile of junk, he calls Moses. He pursues Moses. He delights in Moses. Who is Moses? Nothing but a pile of junk, but God transforms him. And God is pursuing you and calling you and transforming you. So I want you to see, go to verse 1. Then Moses answered, "But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.' The Lord said to him, 'What is that in your hand?' He said, 'A staff.' And he said, 'Throw it on the ground.' So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, 'Put out your hand and catch it by the tail.' So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Now just stop there. When you look or study ancient history, something that you're going to come across over and over again are symbols or signs. You got to remember that we're living in a time, we're living in a culture where everyone is literate, but not everyone in history was literate. And so when a group and masses of people are illiterate, they cannot pick up a book and read because they don't even have books. In a lot of periods in history, there were symbols. Symbols were powerful, powerful things that communicated to you no matter what level of education you had. So let me just give you a few examples of the symbols today. Can we get that next slide up, please? Here we have some symbols, right? We look at the cross, and that's a symbol of Christianity. Any kind, well, nowadays, any kind of remotely Jesus kind of religion, that's what the cross is, right? We can get into pluralism and postmodern and all that stuff, but it is what it is. You don't have to have a high IQ or a high SAT score to understand that the cross represents religion, Protestant religion or something like that, the American flag. What is that a symbol of? Home of the free, freedom, best barbecue in the world. I don't know why that's funny. Okay, but yeah. Nike, that's like athletic excellence, right? Just do it. Superior to Adidas, which is why I don't buy into the hype. But everyone knows what these are. Starbucks, everyone knows it's about burnt coffee, and people love it, right? These are symbols. Now, you don't have to speak the same language. You could put these symbols up anywhere across the world, and people will understand what it means. Now, look at this next image. I want you to see what is on top of Pharaoh's headdress. It's a cobra. That was a symbol to ancient Egyptians that represented power and authority. And so anytime a mere man would put on that headdress, it meant that he was God himself. Because as soon as Pharaoh would put on that headdress and he would look one direction, and it's almost like he's firing a cannon or a missile to a group of people, a people group, a nation, it meant one thing. I'm going to run over you like you're a bunch of ants. I'm going to conquer you. I'm going to enslave you, because Pharaoh back then was the most powerful man on the planet. Now, I want you to hear me when I say this. People didn't see that cobra as a symbol, and it didn't invoke in them nationalism or this zealousy or this pride for Egypt. When you saw the cobra on Pharaoh's headdress, it invoked in you terror and fear, because that's the kind of nation that Pharaoh was ruling. And then what does God do? He takes one of the most common and overlooked things, a staff, and then he turns it into a snake. Moses, grab it by the tail. Are you kidding me? Grab it by the tail? Moses, grab it by the tail. I got you. Grab it by the tail. It's like, it's easy for God. grabs it by the tail, and it turns back into a staff. Now, we're going to see a couple more signs happening, but what is God doing in these signs? He's communicating something to Moses. He's communicating to him. You think that cobra on Pharaoh's head, for some reason, it invokes in you fear and terror, and that's what you're running away from. Listen, Moses, you got to start facing your fears. I got you. Go to verse 6. Again, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. And then God said, put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. So leprosy was a really ugly and nasty disease. And a lot of commentators will say leprosy here wasn't just strictly leprosy, but it was just kind of incurable skin diseases. And we're not used to kind of seeing that, right? A skin disease for us is a bad pimple that we wake up in the morning, right? And we freak out about it. But a skin disease back then, like leprosy, was incurable. And it was so bad that leprosy in specific was so bad that it would create boils and these really nasty, pussy kind of things on your skin. And there's no ointment, there's no medicine, there's no doctor that can cure you for it. So what do? You wrap it up and you call it a day and just hope for the best. And it would start eating away at your nerves. It would start eating away at any kind of sensation. Sometimes fingers and limbs would just fall off. You don't even know it. You would go to sleep, and rats and different vermin would gnaw and lick at your wounds and your skin, and you wouldn't even know it because you don't feel anything. And so lepers weren't just lepers existing with everyone else. It was highly, highly contagious, and so they would separate themselves in their own leprous communities. And it was a clear way of saying, we don't want you near us. You stay with your own kind. In other words, leprosy meant death. It was just a slow and painful and torturous way of dying. And God says to Moses, your hand is now leprous. Incurable disease. And what does God do? Easy, Moses. Don't you see how easy that is for me? I can turn you into a leper and turn your back and restore you at the word of my command. You see, these are things that God is communicating to Moses. You think God is really concerned about impressing Moses? Do you remember our series in John when we went through the 7 signs? You think Jesus is really concerned about impressing people with signs? No. These signs are indicators of who God is. And God is speaking to Moses, and he's building his faith, and he's affirming him, and he's communicating to him, look what I can do. Verse 9, if they will not believe even these 2 signs or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. Now, just think about the physical geography that we live in. Okay, not Egypt, but here in Southern California. I don't know if you knew this, but Southern California is actually a desert region. And we know that from days like today because it's really hot. It's like burning outside. But a lot of times, it actually doesn't feel that way because you can walk outside your house and you see trees and vegetation and plants and green. It doesn't feel like a desert region. And the reason why it doesn't feel like a desert region is just because this wonderful human invention called irrigation, right? Why in the world does a pastor know about California history? I don't know. I just do. But irrigation all comes from Northern California. We should thank Northern Californians for letting us reap their water. While California was in a drought and everyone else in the state is conserving, our intake went up 5%. Thank you, Northern California, right, for being selfish with water. That's how it is. You don't know that you're in Southern California, or you don't know that you're in a desert region because you walk outside and it's hot, but there's green plants everywhere because water is being irrigated. Egypt has one of the best irrigation systems naturally in the entire world. It is called the Nile River. In a place that's isolated and desert and nothing but sand upon sand upon sand, we have this life-giving source of water. It was so life-giving and it was so vital to not just the surviving of Egyptian culture, but the thriving of Egyptian culture. One of the reasons why Egypt was one of the most powerful nations in the entire world at the time was because they were so vibrant with life. Remember at the end of Genesis, when Joseph's brothers are in a famine, where do they go? Egypt. They're hungry, they're in recession, they can't survive, and say they go to Egypt because that's where the Nile was. And these huge floods would cover the land. During the year, it's all sand upon sand upon sand, and then during the rain season, it would flood, and that would create all these life-giving plants, and that's how they thrived. And it was so important to Egyptian culture that they even worshipped. It was like this mystical religion that they celebrated. It was a polytheistic religion, and so the Nile River was like a god to them. In fact, the god that they named it was Happy, H-A-P-I. I don't know how I know that. I do. It was Happy, this god of the Nile. And you think, well, that's weird. Well, they sang hymns and they sang worship songs. Holy, holy, holy is Happy, the god of the Nile. Life-giving sustenance. It is the very thing that makes our people thrive. And then what does God do? Moses, go to Pharaoh, the most powerful man on the planet, get a cup of water from the Nile, and turn it into blood. You see what God is doing? The very thing that is the life-giving sustenance of Egypt, God will take it away by the word of his command. That's power. That's authority. And it's so easy for God. Now here's my question for you. As we look at those 3 signs that God is doing to Moses, simple. Why? Why does God do that to Moses? Because you realize God could have played it out very differently. God could have showed up to Moses. He could have simply said, listen, I want you to go to Pharaoh and free my people. And Moses says, who am I? You don't want to do it, Moses? I'll find someone else. Who are you, Moses? Who are you that you would say no to me? And with a snap of his finger, he could have been gone. And that's the end of Moses. And so you got to realize what's happening here. God is affirming Moses, and he's in the trenches with Moses, if you will. I want you to see that. And Moses is coming up with excuse after excuse after excuse, and God is hanging with him. Excuse after excuse, and he's affirming him, and he's restoring his identity, and he's building his faith, and he's telling Moses, this is who I am. Why? God is speaking Moses' language. I want you to think about that, church. God came down to Moses, not the other way around. It was God who went into the burning bush. It was God who ordained that. It was God who intervened, called Moses, and started speaking Moses' language. You see, one of the most beautiful things of the biblical narratives is that we constantly see God pursuing his people over and over and over. And if you're not churched and you're not a Christian and you don't know much about Jesus and the gospel and this Yahweh God, and you just start reading the Bible, you pick it up, you start reading from Genesis, you get into Exodus, you get into the historical narratives and the prophets, and then you get into the New Testament, what you're going to see over and over and over is God is pursuing his people, and you start asking the same question. Why does this God do this? What is it that God wants out of his people? What do they do? We see God just restoring them, delivering them, bringing them back to their identity, saving them over and over and over. And what do God's people do? Unfaithfulness, spiritual adultery, neglecting God, worshiping idols. Story of our lives, right? That's who we are today. So you ask the same question. Why does God pursue Moses? What does God get out of this? What is God doing to Moses? Right? Speak in his language. You see, one of the wondrous and awesome things about the gospel and about this constant theme about God pursuing his people, and we make that a reality, is that You're spiritually lazy for one day. And that day turns into weeks, and those weeks turns into months, and that month turns into seasons. And now you're in this spiritual rut. And that kind of spiritual rut, feeling like a spiritual pile of junk, it starts to eat at you, and that turns into being jaded as a Christian. That turns into cynicism. That turns into pessimism. That turns into, is God really going to do something in our church? But we're not allowed to say that because we're Christian. And you just get tired and you get exhausted, but you're a covenant member, so you have to serve. And then you come into this place, into this worship, and we start by saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Let me tell you something. No matter how exhausted you are, and no matter how tired you are of church and of life and serving, God loves you so, so much. And He is excited to see you, even if you're not excited to see God. And even though you are spiritually exhausted, God is this incredible life-giving source waiting for you. Doesn't that get you going, man? When you are tired of God and you're tired of the church, but God, like a father, running to you and saying, man, I'm so excited to see you. And in order for God to do that, what is He going to do? He'll come down to us and He'll start speaking a language that we can understand. I don't know if that's speaking to you. I don't know if that's starting to make sense to you. In order for God to come to us, because we can't go to God, He'll start speaking a language that we can understand. You think Moses understands what God is saying? Cobra of Pharaoh, leprosy, incurable disease, Nile River. These are all things that Moses understands. If anyone would understand these things, it is Moses. He's a Hebrew who can speak Egyptian. You didn't find anyone like that. You know, when I see parents taking care of their babies, you know, babies who can't even walk yet, for the longest time, I never said this out loud because I felt like a jerk saying this. I couldn't understand how they could baby talk. To me, it's like, you know, this goo goo gaga kind of language, you know, who's a cute boy, you know, and then start speaking in Korean, and then I get really lost, you know, I'm just like, I don't get it, but I'm just kind of smiling and acting like, you know, it's just kind of awkward for me, right? And then I got these twin nieces, and then I started just kind of, okay, these are my nieces, I'm kind of getting to know them, and they're cute, and then I start to realize, you know what, it's kind of cool hanging out with nieces because it's weird, they have no agenda. You know, they're not here, they're not asking me for candy or money or anything like that. They just want to hang out and they want to play with blocks. And that's how we hang out with babies. It's like the weirdest thing. When I want to hang out with people, I always have an agenda. But these babies don't have no agenda. They want to hang out. And so I'm hanging out with these nieces. I don't know what to do. I have no idea what to do with these nieces. And so we have these blocks, and so they're building blocks, and sometimes they're focused. And they build like these 3 huge blocks. And I'm like, that's awesome, right? And they poop and pee and they drool. And sometimes they're all over the place and they don't know how to focus. They can't build. But I'm just like, that's so awesome. I'm proud of you. Why am I so proud of my nieces? Why do I love them so much? And then it starts to make sense to me. Oh, I got to start speaking their language. It's not English. We all know that, right? It's goo goo gaga baby language, you know? And now I'm not going to imitate it. Don't get your hopes up. But now I'm like speaking the language. I'm coming down to their level. And I come to find, I realize that I am so desperately as their uncle. All I want to communicate to them is, I don't care about these blocks. I don't care about this agenda. I want you to do well. I want you to be smart. I want you to be successful. I just want you to know that your uncle loves you so much. I just want you to know that I'm just here to hang out with you. I just want to spend time with you. I just want to delight in you, and I want you to delight in me. And I just want to know that your uncle loves you so much, that your mom and daddy loves you so much. How do I communicate that to you in a way that you can understand? And God is showing up to Moses in a burning bush, and He's desperately trying to communicate to Moses, listen, I got you, man. The cobra, the leprosy, the Nile River, what is it going to take for you to understand? I got you, and I love you, and I'm pursuing you, and I'm delighting in you. and he speaks to Moses a language that he can understand. And God is doing that because he loves Moses like he loves you, and he's building his faith. Now, go to verse 10. But Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." Then the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak." But he said, "Oh my Lord, please send someone else." Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, "Is there not Aaron your brother the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs." Now, I want to point something out to you from verse 10. Okay, just keep your eyes kind of locked in on verse 10. Moses said, right, it says, "But Moses said to the," what? "Lord." Okay? It's one of those crazy nerdy things that pastors see but no one else sees, right? Okay? Moses said to the Lord. Notice Lord is what? In all caps, right? We talked about this before, right, church? All caps in Lord refers to Yahweh God, right? As opposed to all other gods and polytheistic religions, it is Yahweh God, the same God, the I am who I am God that we talked about last week. Moses said to the, all caps, Lord. And then notice what he says, "Oh my Lord," in lower caps. You see, all caps Lord refers to I am who I am, Yahweh God. Okay, that is the God of the burning bush. Now, the lowercase Lord, that doesn't refer to another God, but Moses is pointing something out, something that's a little bit more particular than all caps Lord. This Lord, the lowercase Lord, is Adonai God. Adonai God, which is emphasizing the supreme authority of God, the supreme power of God. So, what does that have to do with anything? Now, listen to what he says. "Oh, my Lord, Adonai, Lord, I am not eloquent either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue." You see, this is a classic example of church people who learn a ton of theology but don't know how to practice it in an applicable way. This is a classic example of having all the Bible answers but not really sure of how the rubber meets the road. Because we sing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty," and we recognize God for who he is, and then come Monday morning, we don't know what the heck to do with that. Because what is Moses doing? "You are all powerful, and you are Adonai God, but my weakness is greater than your strength." You're strong and you're powerful and you're authoritative, but you're not strong enough to overcome my weaknesses. Isn't that us? Isn't that the story of our lives? Just wonderful, lofty lyrics of Christian songs, great biblical theology, but we don't know how to apply that. You see, Moses says, "I'm not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant." What is he saying? That's who I am, God. I've never been good at speaking. I mean, it's my identity. It's who I am. I'm just not good at speaking. When the rubber meets the road, church, what do we really believe in? Let's be really honest with that question. What do we really believe about God? Do we actually believe that God is greater than the cobras and the pharaohs in our life to the extent that he will actually transform us and he will actually overcome our weaknesses? You see, Do you believe that even though God pursues you, even though God delights in you, and God speaks your language, all because he loves you, that your weaknesses are still too much for God? Can we get that image up? See, this is what Moses believes he is. It's a pile of junk. Rewind. There you go. Pile of junk. See, Moses is taking this. I'm no good at speaking. I'm a pile of junk. He's going to God and saying, God, you're supreme, Adonai, God, holy, holy, all this stuff. And then he says, okay, but I'm a pile of junk. I'm useless. And so he's not believing. He's not practicing his theology. And so this is what Moses believes, right? And so that's where we think. Now, next image. Now, we look at, next image, please. Now we look at this tired old seat, and that's how we feel. Just junk, spiritual apathy, spiritually lazy. How can God use me? How can I serve? All these things. Now, I'm not super artsy-fartsy, okay? I like to think I kind of have an eye for things, but I'm not super artsy-fartsy. And for you art people who actually did well in art classes, you might know where I'm going with this, okay? But there was a guy, famous guy, named Pablo Picasso, and he was this huge artsy guy, artist, who was big on, man, I feel really stupid if you're talking about art. What was he big on? Abstract expression, abstract art, right? Taking things, you have no idea what you're saying, it's a pile of junk, and then he'll see something that no one else does. And so he'll take piles of junk, like old pieces of bikes and worn out bike seats, and he'll create something like this. Like this. Thank you. Yeah, you're not as impressed as I thought you would be. But this is a masterpiece, right? This is Pablo Picasso, the great abstract artist, taking old pieces of junk and creating masterpieces because he saw something in that pile of junk that no one else saw. Because Moses will look at a pile of junk, and that's what he sees in the mirror, because we look in our spiritual mirrors and we see piles of junk. What good am I? What is the potential? And then God sees this beautiful, beautiful thing that he's creating you to be, sanctifying you to be, calling you to be, pursuing you to be, delighting in you to be. God sees us, and he sees things that we don't see about ourselves. And that's okay, because our job is not seeing what God sees in us. Our job is faithfulness. Our job is taking awkward, uncomfortable steps of faith because God has called us to. And this is how our faith is built. And God is speaking your language as he pursues you and he delights in you. He comes to you and he starts speaking your language, and we're just too busy to even hear God's voice. You see? So here's what I want us to think about. Let me just give you 2 points of application as we think about this. There's going to be 2 sources of power and authorities in your life. There's God, and then there's Pharaoh, figuratively speaking. Identify your pharaohs. Remember what I said about Pharaoh. Pharaoh's not about joy. He's not about pride. He's not about celebration. He's about fear and terror. And so how do we know what the pharaohs are in our lives? They will tell you that you are a pile of junk. The pharaohs in your life will constantly tell you that you need to perform to prove your self-worth. These are the pharaohs in our lives. In other words, look at what is instilling in you fear, and that is your Pharaoh. And then you look at Moses and you look at God performing these signs in his life. Why? Because God is the one who is calling you. God is the one who loves you and pursues you. It's not Pharaoh. Go ahead and chase the pharaohs in your life, and you will find how empty and dark and life-taking that is. Be faithful to God's faithfulness. Hear what God is saying to Moses. I got you, man. It's not about your mouth and your abilities. I see something in you that you don't see. Another point of application. In terms of community, in terms of covenant membership, affirm each other. I'm not just talking about encouragement. Of course, encouragement is important. I'm talking about speaking some real truth into people's lives. Not just in times of discouragement, but just in a regular way, to speak truth into people's lives, to be able to square someone up and tell them. I'm not just talking about gassing them up with false encouragement. I'm talking about speaking truth into their lives and telling them things that they need to hear. Listen, this may be risky. I know we're formed, but I feel like God is telling me. I feel like God is laying on my heart. These are things that I see about your life. It's not just sin. I'm not just talking about confrontation of sin. I know we talk about that a lot, but I'm talking about these are things that maybe you should pursue. Like, it's not just you're good at this, but I see God really using you in this way. I'm not just talking about church and serving, by the way. I'm talking about school and relationships and family, everything. Because isn't that what community is for? I mean, you ever ask yourself, why don't I just stay home and worship by myself? I can just hear Pastor Howard online. Because at home, there's no one there to affirm you. There's no one there to reflect back to you God's voice. There's no one there to tell you that you're not a pile of junk, but that God is molding you. God is growing you. He's building your faith. Identify the Pharaohs in your life. See that God's power, God's authority is greater than what you want to pursue in this life. Affirm each other. Affirm each other. What God is doing in Moses, affirm that to each other and speak truth into each other's lives. Join me in prayer.